How's it going, everybody? In today's video, I wanted to kind of go back through my presentation that I gave at WordCamp in Salt Lake City this past weekend. So it's going to be about Headless WordPress, kind of some of the pros and cons of how we use WordPress today and what some advantages and disadvantages might be with Headless. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell to make sure you get notified of my weekly WordPress tutorials. All right, let's jump into it. All right, so first thing is first, let's talk about what I am going to be covering here. So I'm going to be going over what I lovingly refer to as vanilla WordPress. That is just kind of WordPress as we know it today. Next, what headless WordPress is and when it would make sense to use a headless WordPress setup. Next, also when it would not make sense. And finally, we're going to go over a real world example of when headless WordPress would make sense. And I feel like that's where it kind of ties everything together. So what is vanilla WordPress? So right now we have mysite.com and we have our server set up and we have WordPress installed on there. We have PHP and we have MySQL as our database. And then those three together give us kind of our HTML output. And then we tack some CSS and JavaScript onto it. And then we have our site. We have mysite.com. On top of that, outside of what I would kind of still call vanilla WordPress, we do have the REST API, and you can have that feed in information into an outside source like othersite.com, both run by us. But that is information that can be passed along to other pieces. And that's kind of like a step in the headless direction. So when I refer to vanilla, I'm talking about what's on the left side of the screen. So what are advantages of vanilla? Well, you have PHP top to bottom, and PHP is super fast and it's super reliable. If you've been working in the WordPress community, you have used PHP, of course, and you can tell that it's gotten faster and faster over the years. So it's a great tool to have on our tool belt. Super familiar, so you know how to do things and you can be pretty agile with it. It has a large open source community, so when you need to find tutorials such as this one, or how to do things, you can pretty reliably find things. With newer technologies, it's a little bit harder to find established content like that. We are maintaining one thing in this sense, and that's probably going to be your theme that you are creating for your client. If you have a custom plugin, maybe you're managing a little bit more, but like in most cases, you are dealing with one repo only. All your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript is in one spot, which is great. And then you can pull down the one repository. You're probably running Composer and NPM, and then you're good to go. You have plugins. Plugins in WordPress are awesome. There's an insane amount of free plugins, and there's some super powerful premium plugins. Some of my favorites are Yoast SEO, Custom Post Type UI, Advanced Custom Fields Pro, Query Monitor, and then for image optimizations, I've recently started using ShortPixel and EWWW, but I usually tend to go towards Smush, but I'm starting to move more towards the other two. And then, of course, WP Rocket. Some honorable mentions are WooCommerce, Gravity Forms, Regenerate Thumbnails, and much more. I will have links to all of these in the description. And then themes. Sometimes I have super mixed emotions about themes. I love starter themes for development, but grabbing a theme off of Theme Forest is something that I rarely do anymore. It's good for techies, but mostly a hassle for developers. To kind of tangent off of that, I really only suggest buying those kind of themes if you're going to hand it off to your cousin needs a photography site. That's the thing that I would use a pre-built theme for. Something I don't want to build custom. I just want to get it out the door. Instant publishing. When you push publish, your content is live. When we get into headless, we'll realize why that's a pro here in vanilla. You can have that WYSIWYG experience. You have stuff like Elementor where you have that iframe off to the right and you can drag stuff in and you get a preview of the page even before you hit publish. So that's a huge advantage. And then you get that instant feedback of, oh, my text doesn't look quite right. It's wrapping right here. Let me adjust something. It's performant if it is done right. WordPress gets a bad rap for performance, but that's not always true, but it is sometimes. WP Rocket and other caching plugins can sometimes hide those issues by by caching the pages after they have been visited by a user. So if you go to the About page, you load a bunch of images and your HTML, your CSS, your JavaScript, WP Rocket will grab that and spin it into an HTML file that the next visitor will just get served. So it can kind of hide any sort of blemishes behind the scenes. And again, WP Rocket is a link in the description as well. The REST API can be slow, and that's a reason why I'm going to be bringing up some other technologies later to maybe replace that. But the big problem with the REST API, in my opinion, is that when you hit a route, it is asking all the plugins and stuff, hey, do you need to do anything with this before I send it back? And that can be a big problem if you have greedy plugins installed. Plugins and themes can be the culprit sometimes. If you install those very fancy do everything themes, you're going to have a lot of libraries and stuff that you're probably not going to use, but you're paying for it on page load. Plugins, on the other hand, are things that I think you can have like 1,000 of, not really, but you can have quite a bit of plugins and not slow down your site. It's all about what those plugins are doing on your site to make it slow. So if you install a pretty shady slider plugin, then all of a sudden it loads 3 JavaScript files and 2 CSS files on your site. Now all of a sudden you're having to pay for all that when all you want is a slider, and there's much better ways to go about it. But that can slow down your site if that kind of stuff happens over and over again. You can spin up sites super quickly with vanilla WordPress. You can spin something up with something like Flywheel or pre-made Docker images. And then you install some plugins, you install a theme if that's what you want to do, and then you throw it up on some cheap hosting. You have a WordPress site. Awesome. That's really great. It's very fast. So it's for clients and devs. It is very friendly for both. The user interface for clients and content publishers is awesome. They're super familiar with it. Even things that we love to use like ACF and Elementor and stuff like that. Those are ones that most people know how to use. It's developer friendly. We know how to Google things, and there's lots of tutorials for people who Google things. And you probably found this video the same way, and there's a large community of people looking for this kind of content and WordPress content in general. And that's a nice part of the WordPress community. So some disadvantages of vanilla. PHP templating is good. It's not great. There's some tricks to go around it, like with Twig and Timber and all that kind of stuff. But for the most part, React and all those other kind of things, when you're actually creating components and stuff like that, you find some really nice ways to go about creating components and getting things on the page that it's a little bit harder to do in PHP. So good, not great. Plugins are amazing until they aren't. We kind of talked about this. They can actually get you a great head start on your projects, such as advanced custom fields and stuff like that. And it saves a lot of time and money. If you can do a thing where, your boss comes to you and says, I need this kind of thing done, and there's a plugin that exists for it, as long as it's a reputable plugin, you build it or you install it, and then you publish it. And you've saved the company tons of money, you've saved a bunch of time, and you can move on with your life. But some plugins can go unmaintained or have security holes or cause bloat. That actually happened to us very recently at the job where I work now. We have a bunch of sites, and one of them was using a plugin, and we tried to run a build on it, and it was failing because one of the plugins couldn't get pulled down from the WordPress repository. Why was that? It had a security hole in it. They were super good about actually getting that fixed, and they were very good about informing everybody that plugin was being fixed, but we simply could not deploy that site without having something like that fixed. So we kind of had to sit on our hands for a little bit, which was annoying, but it's kind of the nature of the beast sometimes. Performance needs attention. Plugins can help with this, such as WP Rocket. Lazy loading images and optimizing them is a thing that doesn't just happen out of the gate with WordPress. You have to make it do that. And then same with minifying and concatenating your CSS and JavaScript. You don't just get that out of the box. That's something that you have to actually do yourself and set up. And then you need to be smart about API calls and stuff. That's just not necessarily WordPress specific, but I bring it up because transients are a thing that you should be storing some of your API calls in and caching them in the database. And that's kind of why I have this next bullet point, is because that's what will make the response times much faster. The back end and front end are tightly coupled. This makes it harder to redesign and make updates. So if you are very heavily integrated with ACF, and then all of a sudden you need to do a redesign and there's different content on that page, makes it a lot harder to shuffle things around and make design updates because everything is so intertwined. If you need to move away from WordPress to another front-end framework, that's even harder. You're very much integrated with how WordPress handles all of its stuff. So you need to be aware that that's something that would become an issue if you decided to switch away from it. PHP is cheap, but it's not free. Time to first byte can be a killer. And as you start to need to use PHP more and more as your site grows, you're simply going to have to scale your site to more expensive hosting plans. And when you've got databases and PHP and server, you need lots of server computing to happen before you can show the user their web page. It's going to get expensive. So what is headless WordPress then? So this is a graph of kind of what I think a headless WordPress setup would typically look like. So you have PHP, MySQL, and WordPress up there at the top, and then you are keeping and you're not rendering any content on there. I feel like that's something I have to specify. You're not rendering any content through WordPress. You're simply using WordPress to store your data. And then these two places down here at the bottom, we have our website over here, and then our mobile app over here is requesting data through either something like the REST API or WP GraphQL, whatever you fancy. So what are some of the advantages to doing it this way? You have the freedom to use whatever you want on the front end. And that's a big thing, is there's lots of front end technologies nowadays that can improve the experience for the user, such as Gatsby, and we'll be getting into that quite a bit here. But now you can use your WordPress data, and you and the content editor get a good experience of working with WordPress, but then your user can have a good experience working with a statically generated site like Gatsby. So you can use anything like that, or you can do something like what we showed at the beginning, is you have one store for your data and you are using an API to broadcast that data to a website and a mobile app. So whatever makes sense for your project. You can publish the same content to any platforms, just like we saw. And then you can do things like, if I were to go back here, you can make this list down here at the bottom as big as you want. There could be a couple different phone apps. There could be a couple different sites, like an internal site for your company, or something like a CRM for, like, say you have a sales team, and we'll be getting into that kind of stuff later, but that's the kind of thing that you would be able to do. You have one place to store your data that's broadcast out to many. Let's see here. Potentially share code between platforms, and we'll have a graph that shows that, but you can utilize component libraries to share things from site to site and from site to app and all of the above. These are, if you're using something like React, we can actually share React components from one to the other with something like NPM. And then you can pivot at any point. The site, either the site or the phone app can be any language that can hit an API, which is a lot. So you can use Gatsby for a little while, and say you don't want to use Gatsby later, then you can switch to something else, or like Vue or something like that. And then all of a sudden you can, it's a lot easier to pivot because you just consume the same data just with a different front end. So yeah, if you need to go from React Native to Swift and Java, you don't have to really worry about it. You can just, throw away one and then build up a new one, consume the same data over again, and you're not having to worry about the content inside of the app or anything like that. So what might be some disadvantages to doing it this way? The front end and the back end are two different technologies. Now all of a sudden you need to know something like PHP to be able to put together like REST routes, or being able to extend WP GraphQL or something like that. You need to know PHP to extend WordPress if you need to be able to make custom interfaces inside of there. And then now, whatever front end framework you're using, you now need to know that too. So if it is Gatsby, you need to know React now. If you can't do both, then you're probably going to need some extra help, or you're going to have just a harder time getting your feet underneath you. You're now hosting your code in different places. This is not that big of a deal, but it is something to be aware of, especially as you grow, because different hosting companies will help you scale in different ways, and you're going to need to scale differently because, if you are using Gatsby on the front end, you're really only hosting static files. And so you need to have a workflow to just get static files out on the internet. And then with WordPress, it's a server that needs to have a server that has a database and all this kind of stuff. And different hosting companies are not going to provide that. And so you need to be able to adjust for that. So different hosts might have different workflows. So being able to do one thing on one site and have it integrated with Git on one, and you might not be able to do that on another. So for example, like you're hosting your Gatsby static pages on Netlify, which can be integrated with Git, and your WordPress site is on a shared hosting on Bluehost, and you're not going to be able to just use Git on a shared hosting in Bluehost. So now you have to figure out another workflow for that, and that can be kind of a pain. And then so if you have to build and maintain that, it's a pain in the butt. And there's no instant feedback. If you are publishing your content onto WordPress and you're using something like Gatsby, Gatsby has like a build process. And so something like the preview button is not going to work. And then you are limited with plugins as well, because if you want to install a slider, you don't just install the slider and then have it show up on your front end. That is going to be something that you have to manually hook up. It's a lot more work up front. There you have to create the API. You can install something like WP GraphQL and get a lot out of the box, but as things go on, you're probably going to want to extend that to some degree. Same with the REST API. You're going to want to be able to extend that as well. So you're going to have to create the API for that and extend it out. Someone has to build out the front end too. And that's a lot of work as well, because you're usually not starting from scratch, or you are starting from scratch there. Can have a big learning curve, and that is something that I found pretty difficult, is being able to kind of think in both worlds, but it's something that once you get over it, it's not that big of a deal. Can simply be overkill. That's a big one. So then that's what we're going to be jumping into next. This doesn't work for everything. It just simply could be, you see a spider, you throw a grenade at it. It's not really something that is worth the effort. So when would it actually be a good idea? When you're anticipating publishing on multiple platforms. So if you need to publish your same content from WordPress that has your blog posts and your users and lots of meta information on a public facing website and a phone app and a watch app or something like that, that would be a great time to do this, because you're not having to replicate the content in a lot of different places. And so, when you need to have that content appear across multiple services. So if you have a public facing website or like a client relationship management system, when you need to take advantages of modern frameworks like Gatsby, that's a big one, right? Because WordPress by default doesn't do all the things that Gatsby does by default. And if you want to take advantage of that, and plus all the things that Gatsby does, this would be the right way to do that. And if you just want to try it by yourself and you're not looking to, take advantage of everything about it, but you want to give it a try, like on your personal site or something like that, go for it. Like, it's overkill, but it's the right kind of overkill because you're learning. When is headless WordPress a bad idea? You need to rely on plugins or themes. So this is a great example for you're handing this off to somebody. You don't want to say, here's WordPress, which you know and love and probably know how to work, but here's a giant list of things that you just can't do. And that's going to be a little bit difficult for some people to swallow. Like, okay, well, I paid you to make a WordPress site, but I can't install plugins that I want. I don't like that. So that would be a good reason not to do it. So exactly, you're handing this off to someone who isn't tech savvy, because you're going to need to be able to trigger builds and stuff like that. And they're not going to quite understand how that works or why or anything like that. Don't do it. It can be overkill. Just as much fun as a WordPress or a headless WordPress setup could be, it could simply just be overkill. So here's the big one. This is the one that I say all that other stuff to hopefully illustrate this real world example well. So let's say that we have a car dealership and we need a couple tasks. We need to complete a couple tasks where our boss comes to us and says, "Thank you for joining our team. I have a very successful car dealership, but I don't have a website. I don't have a CRM." And if you're not familiar with those, it's a way for like salespeople to keep track of sales and people that might be interested in cars, things like that. And then a mobile app for their users. So like their users can be wandering around the car lot and pull up their app and ping like a salesman and say, "Hey, can you go get me the keys to this like Honda Civic," or something like that. So we have 3 places where we're going to need to have same and similar content. So how would we go about this? This is me personally, what I would do in this kind of situation. I would have a WordPress setup, and that is not public facing at all. That is simply for internal use. So that's where I'm going to log in and make any updates to things that I need to update. That's where people are going to, like people in the front office are going to be entering in new information about cars and new arrivals, deleting cars that have been sold, that kind of thing. And then it would be managing users like salesmen and things like that. So people who can log into the site and then update some of the stuff that they need to update. And then I would not use the REST API. I would use WP GraphQL. There's some reasons about that. And let's actually just dive right into it. So first we use WordPress. It's the source of truth of our data. The employees can enter in information, kind of stuff that I talked about already. So we're going to use WP GraphQL. Why? WP GraphQL is much faster. When you send data in there, it becomes a single request rather than multiple requests, and it is front-end focused. If I need something that is going to give me a car that I need the make, the year, and the model, then I can be on the front end of the site in React and say, those are the things that I need from the API. And then if I needed to add in, well, I also need all the pictures of that car. On the front end, I can ask for those pictures of the car and not go back to PHP in the REST API and modify my route. And then it's query agnostic. It knows if you're asking for meta and categories ahead of time. So if you're like, I need this information about a post, and then I need this information about some of the meta and all that, instead of making a couple queries, it's going to modify this one query that it would make to get all that information for you. The REST API can be slow, kind of like what we talked about. It's asking plugins for, hey, do you need to do anything with this before they send this back to the developer? It loads the WordPress core. It loads plugins who can be greedy sometimes, and there are independent queries that have no idea about each other. So you can go, /posts, and you get stuff all about your posts. And then I need pages too, and then you're going to hit the pages route. And so that's 2 requests instead of just 1, which you can do with GraphQL. And then it has predefined endpoints. So if I had a route that's giving me, the make, year, model of the car, and then I need to get those pictures, I'm going to have to go back to PHP and say, hey, I need to add in the pictures into this route. And then on the front end, then I can consume it after that's been done. And then, so we have the CRM and the website. What am I going to use for that? I'm going to use Gatsby for both. This is actually something that I learned earlier this week, but the CRM would probably need to be like a create React app type of site where it's not statically generated pages. Lots of things are going to get updated and deleted very quickly. Like, it doesn't make sense to have a statically generated CRM. So I'm going to use Gatsby, and Gatsby can have that functionality as well, which I thought was super cool. I didn't know it did that. And then the website would absolutely make sense to be statically generated. We come in, we get the new inventory for the day. Somebody enters that all in, you run a build, and then all of a sudden for that day, you have all of the cars that are now available, and they're super fast because it's Gatsby. It can statically generate those pages way ahead of time. It has a lot of plugins. It has offline support. So if somebody's got some spotty service, as long as they've visited those pages before, they should have access to them. And it's extremely performant. So those are things that absolutely make sense to go the extra mile and get it integrated with, because, you know, when you're searching for a car, SEO is a big deal because lots of people sell Honda Civics. You want to be at the top of those lists. And really the best way to do that, have relevant content and a fast site with good user experience, which can means that we've lazy loaded our content, and actually you can predict user behavior to prefetch content, which is also something that I just learned, that Gatsby can use something called Guest.js. So it'll hook up to your Google Analytics and say, hey, every time that somebody visits your inventory page, they usually click on the Contact Us link right after. So what we're going to do is when they hit that inventory page, we're going to prefetch the content page, because more than likely they're going to click on it. So there's some pretty good, awesome things that it will do for us. So, and then lastly, I would use React Native for the mobile app that the users would use. I think it's pretty obvious why I would do that, but the big kicker at the end is that now all of a sudden you can share components between all three of these because they are React based. You can have an NPM package that says it has a bunch of components that you're going to use on all of these pieces of our platform. So you have a card, and that card has a picture of the car, and it has the make, the year, the model, and then the price. That's going to make a lot of sense to have on our CRM for the salespeople to take a look at. It's going to make a lot of sense for the user who's Googling our site, because they want to browse inventory. And it's going to make a lot of sense to have that same component on our mobile app, because as they're wandering their parking lot, they can see what car that they want to request the keys for, hit a button, and then it sends it to one of our other two places. So these are the kind of things that you're going to want to share between, and there's no sense in remaking that same component for each one of these platforms. There's no need to recreate that. So I feel like that's a pretty big reason why going this route is super important. So in conclusion, use a headless setup if it makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, don't. There are plenty of reasons why you should use it, and there are plenty of reasons why you shouldn't. I would say really the main reason why you would go this route is if you need to do something that looks pretty similar to this, where you need to have a source of truth, and that source of truth needs to have data that will be the same on multiple different platforms. So these are things that I feel like would make a lot more sense if you're just taking content and you need to output it to a page. I mean, if you need performance and stuff like that, caching plugins and stuff like that can get you pretty far. Gatsby obviously has the leg up on WordPress as far as performance goes in a lot of other areas. But ultimately, I think that this kind of setup is for when you start publishing in multiple places. So thank you for watching me ramble about Headless WordPress for this amount of time. If you liked the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and leave a comment. Tell me if you learned something, or tell me if I am completely wrong and you would absolutely never do something like this. I want to hear back from you guys, and I always love hearing back. So leave a comment, hit the like button. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe. I appreciate you guys. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.